Welcome to Visionary Voices Exchange, the podcast that disrupts how we think about blindness and low vision. So join us as we amplify the voices of individuals, families, and professionals living, learning, and thriving with blindness and low vision. We're your hosts, Janet Lebrecht and Carlos Serván. Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Lebrecht, and I'd like to welcome you to Visionary Voices Exchange. I'm your host, and I'm also joined by my co-host, Carlos Serván. Hey, Carlos.
Hey, Janet, and hello, my friends. I'm glad to be part of this exciting project. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Carlos, one of the things that we were thinking about this podcast, and I thought it might be interesting to share with our listeners why we actually wanted to do a podcast for titled Visionary Voices Exchange. And I think that one of the reasons that I thought might be interesting for the public to know about is, number one, the prevalence of blindness in the United States. Oftentimes we think about blindness when it hits our families or friends indirectly, and we just don't have all the information that we necessarily need in terms of what causes the blindness. Why are people going blind? How are they living with blindness? And so I thought I would just share a little bit of data because I was looking at some information. And the American Foundation for the Blind in the United States talks about blindness and the prevalence of it. And they state that there are approximately 8.7 million individuals living with blindness. And of that number, around 1 million individuals are living with total blindness or low vision. And when you think about that number and those, that data, it's absolutely incredible because by the year 2030, individuals across the globe are expected to experience blindness or low vision at a rate that is increasing very quickly. And so I thought maybe, number one, it's always helpful to hear about people's individual journeys with blindness, but also, what some of the typical causes of blindness. And I thought we would love to hear your story and kind of walk through your journey because I think we can certainly inform and raise awareness about vision loss and how to live with vision loss and what our journeys look like as individuals who are both blind. So want to kick it off by asking you a couple of questions. You ready?
I am. We're going to start with our own stories, right?
Yep. So start right at home. Absolutely. So I wanted to just start by asking you, when did you become aware that you were going blind and what was the cause?
Well, in my case was a sudden time. I grew up sighted and I became blind when I was 20 years old while getting training on a detective academy in Peru. A grenade exploded on my right hand, which caused the last of my right hand, and I became blind right there. However, the doctors sent me to the Johns Hopkins Hospital. That was in 1986. I got a surgery. Right away, they told me I lost my left eye, and the right eye, they said the surgery was a success, and then gradually I was going to get my vision back. Well, gradually I got some light perception and then some shadows, and I was able to see bright red, but that was it. And that only lasted a couple of months, and then I started to lose the whole thing again in another 2 months, and then I was totally blind. So that's my story about how I became blind.
Mm-hmm. And so folks might be interested to know, certainly your cause of blindness was trauma. And
Correct.
You not only lost your vision, but you also lost a hand. Talk about what that impact, had on both you as an individual. You were 20 years old?
20 years
at the time?
Yep.
So you're a person...
Tall, handsome, and dark, yeah.
Yes. And you were a person that obviously had vision. Obviously, you had not lost your hand. and all of a sudden you have this very traumatic experience. Talk about what that meant for you as an individual, but also talk about it from your family perspective. How did you cope with that?
Yeah, well, I was the kind of person who, according to my mom, my dad, and some friends, were mature. When we were getting ready to graduate from the Detective Academy, we were combating terrorism, and we were told all the time, you be ready, it can happen to you, because we have policemen dying almost every day. So we try to prepare ourselves to be ready to die if we have to. Mm-hmm. But also we have a lot of folks who were, getting in wheelchairs, missing their legs, their arms. So I remember being 20 years old, very strong. I was dating my girlfriend back then, doing, self-defense or karate, playing soccer, walking just through a park. And I thought, anything could happen to me. I had to be ready. If I lose my legs, I can be in a wheelchair. If I lose my arms, I know people can use their legs to draw, to type. And if I losing my hearing, I can still see and do other things. I met some deaf people. And then I thought, but if I become blind, and in less than a second, I thought, I don't want to think about it. Mm-hmm. Just like that, no, I don't want to think about it. Sure. And then I became blind. The only exposure I have to a blind person back then was I saw an older gentleman back then, maybe in his 60s. Now that I'm almost 60, I don't think that's old, but that's what I was back then, because I was, 10, 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And this guy was totally blind, just begging, playing in some kind of drums, but he made the drums just with an empty can and a couple of sticks. He made music, very nice music, and people threw coins. That, to me, was the only exposure to blindness. So when I became blind, I thought, okay, I'm the same guy. I feel I have the same essence. I can still think. I want to do different things, but I didn't know what. I just didn't. So I got frustrated. I got angry. My mom, I remember when she heard the news, how she cried. I never saw her crying like from the bottom of her heart, her guts. I just sometimes want to cry when I remember those days.
Sure.
And I thought, well, it's very painful for a mom to lose a child, but I'm not dead. But is that bad to be blind? I didn't feel that bad. Yeah, it was frustrating. I got angry, but I wasn't dead. I thought I had hope. I knew I could do something. I just didn't know how. Mm-hmm. And because I was angry and frustrated, I started to argue with my girlfriend back then. And then eventually we broke. She just wouldn't, I guess, understand my situation. But I also didn't understand her situation. When she met me, I wasn't blind. And I was a nice guy, All of a sudden, I became blind. I was still the same guy, but I was acting angry and frustrated. And I used my anger and frustration mainly against my mother and my girlfriend, the two people who loved me. My mother, as mother, will forgive me everything. But I think my girlfriend eventually became tired. So we broke, but that was very painful. Not necessarily because, just breaking a relationship, but it was because in my mind was, she broke because I'm blind, or we are not getting along because I'm blind. Mm-hmm. And in the bottom of my heart, on the back of my mind, I thought, am I ever going to be able to date? I was 20, 21. it was hard. It was very, very, very hard. My siblings always supported me. My friends, they were nice, Like I say, you become blind, you are still the same guy. So we tease a lot, we just give each other a hard time. But I wanted to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you were 20 years old. Obviously, you're dealing with all this trauma, not only because of the disability and kind of making that adjustment, to a dual diagnosis of a disability, but you also had issues with relationships, and certainly a normal part of adjusting to any type of disability is going through the process, and it's very much like going through the grieving process, similar stages, and it's also very much individualized in that no two people may necessarily experience the same thing at the same time. But also, because of that relationship, there were other things in your life that certainly had to be adjusted. And number one, you were 20 years old. And so I'm assuming, were you driving a vehicle? Were you able to drive during
I was able to drive, but back in Peru in those days, most people didn't have cars, but I learned to drive. And I thought about missing driving, but it wasn't like I drove all the time.
Sure.
Because we in Peru use a lot of public transportation, so that wasn't necessarily a big deal for me.
Yeah. So I asked that question because oftentimes, those of us who are blind and navigating their way through all the traditional stages of life, and that driving is one of those stages of life that I think many young people take for granted and being able to do. And we now don't necessarily get to experience, that sort of that transition between young adulthood and adulthood, that we want to be able to drive. It means you have your freedom. You're able to go out with your friends. You're able to drive your girlfriend to a date. But that's a loss in the loss column for you. So, however, the cultural differences perhaps in your country where driving was not necessarily the end all and be all because you had other methods, public transportation and getting around. What other barriers, obviously, did you experience, because not just because of the loss of driving, but other skills, other tasks that the blindness now presented a problem for?
Well, for me, I'm from Peru. I became blind in the mid-'80s. And back then, terrorism was in the peak. Inflation was very high. The economy was very bad. Unemployment was very, very high. And of course, for people with disabilities, were almost, not available for us. We couldn't get jobs. That was a frustration because being young, when you go to meetings or parties, start talking to folks, usually, hey, what do you do? Well, yeah, I go to school. Oh, wow. What do you do? Well, I work. What do you do? Oh, I do this. And when they came to me, and what do you do? Nothing. Just asking those questions was painful.
Sure.
So I wanted to get training. Eventually, I got in a little center for the blind to get training. It was not with dormitories. It was only from 8 to 1 p.m. 8 in the morning to 1 p.m. But that showed me the main thing, which I still like it a lot, which is mobility, to get around. But they also told us that blind people could only work doing massage and music and receptionist.
So they were very, very specific career paths that
for blind people, yeah.
Probably somewhat were, for blind people that were, some of that's cultural, you think?
More than cultural, I think it's based on the economy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it's based on the economy. That's something that I talk to folks a lot because what I tell folks is, now that the economy is doing better, I see things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my mom, I remember too, was telling me, okay, as long as I live, I'm going to live with you and take care of you. Well, in our culture, moms don't take care of regular adults.
Yeah.
It was just because I was blind, but I also want to support myself and eventually help my mom like anybody else. And that's what I do now. But, we can get to that in a bit. The economy was bad, but also the misconceptions about the blind, the misunderstanding, the misinformation about the capability of the blind. I knew, again, in deep in myself, that I could do more. I just didn't know how. That's why I keep getting frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think what contributes to the frustration also is the lack of information, the lack of access to others who, for example, might be blind and they're doing very different things. When you were going for your treatment after your injuries that you sustained, did you get the opportunity? Where did you get the opportunity actually to meet others who were blind so that you could see that others can actually do other things if they're blind? Where did you have that experience?
Well, that was very much when I came to the United States, because in Peru, I met other blind people. I met a guy who was going to school to become a teacher, so I knew blind people could go to college. But eventually, when he graduated, he didn't find a job as a teacher, so he became a massage therapist. And still is and makes a lot of money.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. But I think he wanted to be a teacher in the beginning. I like to make money, but I want to make money in the profession career I want. I have respect for anybody who gets up in the morning and go to work every day or works hard. But I think we should be able to choose the type of career we want, not given just a 5 kind of jobs that they tell us to do just because we are blind. So I immigrated to the US. And to be honest, when I came, I ended going to church. They have in Baltimore, they had something called the Hispanic Apostolate. They help immigrants there. So I went there, and the nun, Sister Mary told me, okay, what do you want? Why are you here? And I said, well, there are Hispanics here, and I'm an immigrant. Well, yeah, I know that, but what do you want? She was very direct and blunt. I said, well, I would like to work and go to school. Well, how can you do that? I don't know. You told me what I want. So she looked at the yellow pages, or asked the secretary to do that, and found the headquarters of the National Federation of the Blind. The next day, I was sent there with my mother. My mother told me, oh, this place look big, has 4 floors. And what came to my mind was, okay, there are dormitories on each floor. Maybe there are cafeteria. So they take care of blind people here. And I wanted to tell my mom, I can stay here. You go to Peru. I'm not going to be a burden to you. So I remember getting to the 4th floor, walking into the reception area, kind of bent my back, trying to show that I was pitiful. My mom did the talk, but the young lady there started to talk to me rather than my mom or the interpreter. And my mom told me, oh my God, she's blind. How do you know? Well, she just got her cane and pulled her earbuds out. She was using the computer, she said. And to me, that was the first time seeing a competent blind person talking with confidence and in charge of herself. She said, okay, I'll be back. And she left using her cane. And after a couple of minutes, another woman came, very confident, and she was talking to me, not to my mom, not to the interpreter. The interpreter only translated, but the woman was talking to me.
So you didn't feel ignored or that this person was talking through someone else instead of addressing you directly just because you were blind.
Exactly. And I didn't even notice that what happened. As I was used in Peru, they will talk to my mom, not to me.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I went to do things on my own.
Sure.
But also I noticed people will talk to me with pity. These women, they were talking normally. And my mom told me she's also blind. And I thought, okay, this sounds good. Anyhow, by the end of the conversation, they gave me a couple of tapes and a white cane. I got frustrated because I thought, okay, what do I do with a couple of tapes and a white cane? Left kind of very sad from that building, thinking that I wasted my time coming to the most powerful country in the world, the more advanced country with technology, and all I'm getting is a couple of tapes, not even a tape recorder, and a plastic cane. At least that's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
So then I got to the apartment where some friends were hosting us, and I borrowed a tape recorder because I had nothing to do. And there were a couple of speeches by Dr. Kenneth Jernigan, and they were the translation in Spanish. And what I always remember was this a couple of sentences that said, the real problem about blindness is not being blind itself. It's the misconceptions about the blind. We blind people can compete in terms of equality when proper training and opportunity are provided.
Sure.
And I thought, that's what I feel. That's what I want. Well, and he went on about giving examples of different things blind people are doing. And I thought, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And eventually, somebody from the NFB called me, Eileen Rivera from Puerto Rico. I call her my godmother because she started to help me trying to see if I could go to get training in the US. And I ended in New Mexico, where Dr. Schroeder was the director of the New Mexico Commission for the Blind. So that's where I ended going, with also the assistance of the Peruvian embassy. And that's where I got my training in New Mexico. And that's when I started to meet more blind people who are very competent, I mean.
Mm-hmm. So let's think about your career path, because obviously you went through a lot of changes. You've had to migrate to the United States, get training, all at the same time while you were dealing with your blindness and a loss of your hand as well. And so you were originally training in Peru to be a detective, right?
Correct.
And so your experience coming to the United States, how did that shift your thought process? Obviously, you were not in the academy anymore in Peru to train as a detective. How did your disability actually, help you to rethink your career path?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I also talked to some friends who are still detectives, and they asked me a similar question. And I said, well, when we get training to be detective, what they teach us is there is no perfect crime.
Mm-hmm.
And detectives are doing, quote unquote, detective work, meaning you keep checking around. You try to find the answer. So when I got my training, and it was under structural discovery training, that's what the structural discovery is about. Okay, how can you find an answer for this? For instance, I missed my right hand. I needed to learn how to type with one hand. In Peru, they told me I couldn't because I missed my right hand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the structural discovery training, they thought, let's find a way. Well, I pushed myself to find a way, and I eventually did it. Now I just type without even thinking about it. And I can tell you more and more similar stories. Then for desperation, because I needed a job, I started to work in a summer work program teaching blind youth. But I noticed and I like it because all of them had the same issues I did, meaning they needed to know how to function as a blind person. I didn't have all the answers, but I had several. So we worked together. And eventually, when I started to work more, or I got my degrees, I said, what do I want to do? I realized I became a detective because I like to serve people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I want to serve people as a detective, I was willing to give my life to protect others. Now, in the field of blindness, there are a lot of challenges. I remember when I was running the transition program, the budget was cut. And my challenge was, okay, I care about this program a lot. I'm going to find funding. So I found a way to find the funding. So it's very much those transferable skills. Number one, I like to serve people. Number two, whenever there is a challenge, like a detective, you keep working until you find an answer. And I get excited doing those things. My adrenaline, my brains start to generate those chemicals that give me energy. And that's why I love my job. Each day is different. There are different challenges. State government, federal government, local government. Each case is different. And I just love it. It keeps challenging me.
And speaking of your role in loving those kinds of challenges, you eventually went to Nebraska, and you are now the state director for the Nebraska Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Right. Along your journey throughout your career, how much do you think that your experience contributed to your being a leader in this particular agency?
Well, let me go back a little bit. I have my undergrad in political science and Latin American studies. Then I also have my law degree and a master's in public administration. So I always wanted to work for the government, meaning be a public servant. And I became very involved with organizations of the blind, mainly the National Federation of the Blind. I was elected to be president of the student division in New Mexico, then at the national level, then chair of the fundraising committee. So I keep getting elected without realizing people were recognizing on me leadership. Mm-hmm. And I assumed those responsibilities, and I noticed I enjoyed, number one, the responsibility. I took it like just a challenge, but I always knew that I couldn't do things by myself. I always ask, work with people. And I was good doing that, talking to other people, working with other students, eventually, raising money, the same thing. You don't do things by yourself. You motivate others, you talk to others. And in my case, it was by doing it myself. I was in front, selling raffle tickets, selling chocolates, candy bars. And that's the way I motivate others to work with me. So in the rehabilitation area, same thing. I started to work with younger kids. I make sure they left the summer knowing way more than when they came in. I saw parents crying when they saw the difference in their kids, just the way how they walk with confidence. Mm-hmm. Just telling the parent, mom, dad, I can make my bed. I can do things at home. I want to become a professional. I want to work. You don't have to feel sorry for me. Parents cry because they saw their kids having hope. And that made me very happy. And I realized that in other agencies that wasn't happening. So eventually I was recruited to come to Nebraska. And in Nebraska, they put a lot of emphasis back then on training. So Nebraska is known for the quality training we provide for people to become independent. But there were other challenges. Unemployment was still high. So the first challenge I was given was, okay, we need to turn this around. And again, I worked with the district supervisors. Gradually, we started to change that around, and we became the second one in the nation, like I told you before, right after Massachusetts, on placing blind people in quality jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, you clearly are, I think, a role model for the clients that you serve in Nebraska and as well as around the country. I know that you are well respected across the blindness as well as other disability community as well. What do you think, just before we close here, what do you think your biggest accomplishment was in terms of either your career or, personally?
Well, there are different things, but in my career, I think is helping the Nebraska Commission for the Blind, number one, become a separate agency for the blind, because we were under Health and Human Services. And in the year 2000, I was the chair of the legislative committee. So work with several blind individuals here, and we together were able to get a separate commission for the blind. In fact, we were the last agency that became a separate commission for the blind.
Mm-hmm.
And then we didn't have enough funds, and gradually we have good state funds now. The state provides the funds we need now, but that wasn't the case before. And as we work together with consumers here in Nebraska, we celebrate how we are providing training to youth, to seniors, and for those who are seeking for jobs. So I guess my greatest accomplishment as a professional is recognizing that I cannot do the job by myself, but work with consumer organizations, both the National Federation of the Blind and the American Council of the Blind. We work here, and we are providing very good services on all the programs that I mentioned, including our training center and also the business enterprise program. And in the personal level, besides having my children who are professionals, I guess I was able to write 3 books now, 2 in Spanish and 1 in English. So to me, those are the ones that I can remember the most.
Great. And your last book, Running Dreams, I think is absolutely incredible. I think that it's a book that a lot of different types of people with different challenges can certainly learn from and benefit from. But I think the inspiration is there. But also, I think that one of the things that you're able to convey so effectively as personally as well as professionally is high expectations. And I think that that's what it takes, for someone, in this type of a journey, to have those high expectations. If someone else doesn't have them for you, we need to find someone else who can help give you, that inspiration, give you that motivation, give you that hope. So that you can get through life's journeys, because there's multiple journeys, lots of ups and downs that we're all navigating our way through in this world. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. But I also want to make sure that the audience knows that if you are in any state in the United States, that there are vocational rehabilitation programs for individuals who are blind or low vision or have other disabilities. And that these are the types of agencies that can help with retraining and providing some skill sets in college tuition and other expenses for individuals based on eligibility. So I think that we want to make sure that we let people know that there is organizations out there, these organizations, as well as some private nonprofit organizations like the American Council for the Blind and the American Foundation for the Blind and the National Federation of the Blind. These are all private nonprofit organizations that can also help as well.
Yeah, and I encourage people to join the organizations because we need that kind of mentoring, that network. It helps us. And I mentioned my books. I'm not trying to make money because if you get into BARD, you can see my book there and you don't have to pay anything.
Absolutely. And I do want to thank you for sharing your story with us. And I also want to make sure that our listeners remember to subscribe and to like our program. We are going to be also on YouTube and other podcast platforms. So be sure to like and subscribe so that you can get access to our episodes every week on Thursday at 7 p.m.
That's what I was going to say. My favorite date since I was little is Thursdays.
Thursdays. All right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And we will definitely look forward to continuing our podcast journey together.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. Next time I'll interview you.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Okay.